what's up YouTube? Welcome to today's video where we're going to go over why exactly GGG nerfed Harvest. Now this is a pretty big point of contention that a lot of people bring up. They're not really sure why GGG is trying to destroy deterministic crafting. Well, we analyzed in the past what exactly GGG intended to accomplish when they first made Harvest, and then removed Harvest, and then re-implemented Harvest back in its original state, and then decided to nerf it again. And then a long time passed, probably like a year plus, and then they decided to nerf it again and make it tradable, as they may call it. So this is GGG pretty much with the triple nerf bombs dropping onto the Harvest plots. And we're going to find out exactly why Harvest is the way it currently is today and why it probably won't get changed. Now, originally wanted to make this video because I was on Twitter and I saw a tweet about how expensive mirror items were to craft even last league. So right here you can see the changes to crafting are good because mirror tier items should be difficult to make. So this is the take that this person is disagreeing with, and he's saying that 12 leagues were on average 3,000 to 4,000 exalts prior to recombinators to make from start to finish. And most of this cost is pretty much trying to get the suffixes and what you have to do, remove non-influence, add influence, or aug influence, which all ends up being like 30 to 40 exalts because the Harvest crafts were really gated by the rarity. And triple T1 Fizz Bow was around 12,000 exalts, and this is pretty much trying to get triple T1 prefixes. It is extremely hard, even with how so-called deterministic the Harvest used to be. And trying to get additional arrows is also extremely expensive, even if you believe that Reforge much more likely is just completely broken. Now, a triple T1 Ellie Bow is around the same thing, 2,000 exalts, because you have the Reforge Lightning or Fire or Cold, and try to hit a roll that is extremely low weighting. So someone else had a different opinion that said, I like that making mirror tier items are costing stupid amounts of divines, again like in the old days. To me, that's what a mirror tier item should cost. So there's probably some disconnect going on about what exactly a mirror tier item should cost. And the bigger question really revolves around if mirror tier items should even exist. And that is the biggest thing. Should mirror tier items exist in that if you spend a certain amount of currency, you're pretty much guaranteed to craft it? Or should it be an item where you pretty much have to win a lotto and you get lucky, and an item that you probably will never be able to make again, or someone else will never be able to make again in that template? So in order to understand why GGG's philosophy trends towards making mirror tier items pretty much near unobtainable to craft by any deterministic means, we have to understand the history of Harvest. So Harvest started not in the best of shape. Harvest League was always not that great. It was a pretty bad league overall at the start. It had great retention later on once people figured out how to fix the guard it, and GGG actually nerfed the life force, or they increased the storage tank capacity. So what happened before was you would get some seeds in a map and you would take the seeds and you would plant it in your own garden. As you may recall, there were these spreadsheets that started circulating on Reddit, and it kind of became a meme how we were trying to build or play a different type of game that wasn't really an ARPG. So you would see here there's some stuff called P, which are pylons, and S, which are storage tanks. So you would have these seeds that you plant in your garden or your plots, and then you would run pylon, and then every single time you harvested the plot, you would get life force, which you would store in the storage tank. And the biggest problem with Harvest at the start was that the storage tanks only stored up to 300 life force, but when you harvested some of the bigger crops, they actually had 2 million life force. So you can see here another league that wasn't really tested at all. And as you can see, you have the life force and pylons, and then you would try to make you drag over all of the life force you have into these big plots where you try to plant the higher tier seeds, which are the 3 and 4s. So it's all very confusing. And the original implementation was another untested disaster. And this was really the start of a warning trend where every single league felt like they did not even test it at all. But the big thing about Harvest is it led to players understanding how mod tag works, and GGG eventually allowing you to see tags when you hold Alt. So during this league, if you don't remember before, you can see how every single one of these mods has like damage, physical attack, ailment. This stuff didn't used to be in the game. Most players actually had no idea what mod tags even were. Now, GGG did decide not to implement Harvest as a core gameplay mechanic, but they did say it would probably be reintroduced in the future. So as you can see here, they actually made this one post called "Will Harvest Become Core Path of Exile Content?" And right here they said they wanted to experiment with a more deterministic crafting system that would enable players to access powerful items earlier in the character progression, but they do say it is too easy at the top end of gameplay to obtain very powerful items, and is acceptable for a short-term league, but poses problems for the long-term health of PoE's item economy. Now this is kind of an interesting statement to make, because who cares about PoE's item economy in terms of the long term? Because every single league is a temp league. So the only long term there is standard, and most people do not really mess around with standards. So it's actually a very interesting way of balancing it, because I truly believe PoE is a 3-month temp league game for the vast majority of players, and it is fine if people make powerful items because it literally gets wiped in 3 months and the game is completely fresh again. They also looked at alternate ways of gaining access to harvest mechanics, so they pretty much wanted to gut this super confusing way of doing things and make it a lot more simpler, which is the harvest that we have today. Now, when they re-implemented harvest back into PoE, this was considered a peak of PoE, right? Ritual League 3.13. So Ritual League brought back harvest in its full glory, and GGG never removed any of its overpowered crafts. So the most overpowered crafts that used to exist were definitely the targeted annuls and exalts. So what a targeted annul means is that you could theoretically guarantee to remove off a certain suffix. So right now you can see here, if you don't want the crit chance mod, you could technically all crit, guarantee to crit on, and then remove crit, and then keep doing it over and over again until you get T1 crit multi, which is around a 1 in 6 chance. And it is really weird why GGG decided not to actually remove any of these crafts. So the way they set it up originally was they wanted to gate the rarity of the crafts by how rare it was. Now, in Ritual League, it was pretty much possible for anyone to craft GGG gear without having to deal with setting up the garden. It was super, super easy. And another thing that people don't realize is that players were able to make a ton of currency by selling crafts for multiple exalts. A lot of low-end players were able to just pretty much put harvest on their atlas or take the nodes on the previous atlas tree and then run a toll, get a harvest plot, and come out with 3 to 4 exalts. And that was just really, really good for the casual player. And you can see here his videos like Harvest is making me rich. And then this one is by Grimro, Harvest is back, how to abuse it. So it was considered a peak of PoE. A lot of people mentioned how they were able to try out non-meta builds and succeed, because they were able to have actually good items for once. Now, the fun has to end, right? And 3.14 is the start of the downward trend of harvest. So GGG started becoming concerned by how deterministic some harvest crafts are and how easily players can craft near-perfect items. And I do think how easily players can craft near-perfect items is kind of over-exaggerated. Most people, even in Ritual League, were still spending like 50 to 100 exalts to craft a near-perfect item or more. 100 to 200 exalts. And even though that may seem like a small amount to someone who plays the game a lot, 200, 300 exalts or 100 exalts is a lot for a casual player. A lot of the farming methods you see that are 5 exalts or divines per hour nowadays are not really 5 divines, because no one actually plays with 100% efficiency when they farm. They take breaks, they get distracted by trade. So in terms of how many hours it takes for a casual player to make a so-called perfect item, it is an insane amount of time. And then GGG said that this was not consistent with how Path of Exile's itemization actually should work. They explained how Harvest was meant to craft items for the early game before you had a lot of currency, allowing you to upgrade your items by throwing a few crafts at them in almost every area you play. So it seems like GGG still wants your item acquisition to be random. They said right here, we're going to ensure we're concerned about how deterministic, and they pretty much not consistent. The way they want players to obtain items is through randomness and not deterministic crafting. So originally, Harvest was pretty much designed as a league where you would be able to craft items for the early game. It would get you used to how to use an Exalted Orb, a Divine Orb, and a Null Orb. And that was pretty much the original purpose of Harvest. And their original purpose of Harvest was not for people to create super endgame items. And they did say they decided to implement Harvest into the core game in 3.13 by making the most valuable crafts extremely rare outcomes. However, they said right here, with Harvest integrated into the core game with 3.13, players still made ridiculous items. Like, that's really that bad. Even if crafts we made quite rare felt pretty common when the entire community was pulling them together and using them on the right items. So this is pretty much GGG acknowledging that trading harvest crafts was already in the game through some community ways. So the whole reason why they gave as to why harvest has to be the way it currently is without reforged key prefix and suffix is not because it was tradable. It's because harvest was still not in line with GGG's item philosophy or vision for how obtaining items should be. GGG at its core has stated many times, and I have looked in the past through all of these development manifesto, that they don't want players to ever get a perfect item. They don't want it to be deterministic at all. They want there to be a huge diminishing return in terms of the currency you spend in order to get a perfect item. So if you get a 5 mod item versus 6 mod item, it has to be extremely exponential. Now, this next part I can kind of agree with. Harvest did make a lot of other crafting and game systems obsolete. Like, why would you fossil craft? Why would you like exalted orb slam and close your eyes if you could just use harvest exalts, right? So that's the core reason why they wanted to nerf harvest. Now, next up, we have GGG's item philosophy. And this is the one thing that you should probably pay attention to as to why our harvest will never be the same. And they say at its core, Path of Exile is a game about the acquisition of powerful items. Now, that is actually 100% true. When we are designing Path of Exile, a critical aspect of item acquisition is that it is through random rather than deterministic means. So that means when you kill a monster or boss, you can potentially drop a rare that's 6T1, and that's how you might get your item. Now, it's very important for them for items to be hard to perfect, and that is shown by that there's going to be significant diminishing returns in the currency item crafting process. So say like this claw I have currently, in order to make this a 6T1 or 6 modded claw and not crafted, it would cost an insane amount of currency. It's literally exponential. It would cost roughly like 50 to 60 times the amount of currency to make it. And that is all good, right? Now, the next part is I feel where they actually go off and they're wrong. Players will be left with nothing to achieve if they've finished their items too fast. This is something that you see on Reddit a lot that people argue about. And there is no chase, they say. If you can get the perfect mirror item, there's no chase anymore. Because once you get the perfect item, then why even play the game? Now, this is actually fundamentally false in my opinion. Because there's also no chase when something is impossible to obtain. No one is going out in the real world and buying lottery tickets if it's impossible to actually win. And that is what PoE's item system has become. I mean, some people do buy lottery tickets, but you don't actually expect to actually ever get the item in PoE. A lot of people, when they look at how to craft an item and it costs them the thousands of exalts, and the currency money making methods are so low right now, there's no way that people will continue playing the game because they're trying to chase to make the perfect item. Players are not going to continue playing the game for an insane lottery ticket that is pretty much unobtainable. They're going to quit the game. They're going to do something else with their time because their time is not being valued. Now, in the end, GGG has said that this is not the Path of Exile they set out to make. The crafting method that Harvest provided, the deterministic way with checkpoint crafting, is just not their vision and is not what they set out to make. In the end, reforged key prefix to suffix, lucky harvest divines, targeted augments with no downsides, influence crafts or reforged non-influence add influence are just too popular, or not too popular. They don't fit in the vision of the item acquisition for GGG through random means and diminishing returns in the crafting process. And that's kind of true if you think about it. Without any checkpoints in crafting, there is huge diminishing returns when you go for the 4th or 5th or 6th mod on an item. And you can see why removing these crafts are really important in like adhering to GGG's vision of item acquisition and item philosophy. So Lucky Harvest Divines is the same way. Divining an item, as GGG says, should be the last step. So there should be huge diminishing returns in trying to finish a perfect item. And it should cost probably more to divine the item than to actually craft it out. And that is just how GGG's philosophy actually works. In terms of a targeted augments, that's just not going to be the case because they want you to have a chance to break the item when you get the 6th mod on there. So no longer can you actually just crit and get a guaranteed crit multi-roll. You have to risk getting off your attack speed roll or your crit chance roll or something like that. Now, influence items in their eyes are probably just the cream of the crop, where they are the most hard items to make, and without like AUG influence and stuff like that, stuff like the 11 link claw, 12 link wand, or 12 link claw, and like 8 link spark gloves and stuff like that should just be insanely hard to craft, and it needs to be pretty random in that you have to YOLO exalt it on or something like that. Now, you can pretty much understand why GGG's vision is the way it is and why these harvest crafts are in the game if you actually just look in the past of history and see what they have said in the past. Now, does that mean their vision is correct or good for the player base and long-term health of the game? In my opinion, it is no. It is not good to make crafting so insanely expensive that no one is actually able to really experience it. And right now you can say they want to try to increase diversity in crafting options. Well, right now the diversity in crafting options is taking a fractured item and doing essence on every single item that you can possibly use, while harvest is pretty much not as used anymore. Now, it does acknowledge a worrying fact is that GGG always knew that harvest crafts are tradable and nerfed harvest accordingly in 3.14. And they also know that you can gate a harvest craft by rarity. But in the end, the harvest crafts weren't removed because they were tradable. They were removed because they did not fit GGG's vision of how deterministic crafting should not be the way to go and item acquisition should be random. Now, another reason why you might think that this may happen is that maybe Sentinel Recombinators scared GGG a little bit and made them remember their original item philosophy, because weapon recombinators or Sentinel Recombinators were extremely powerful. That was pretty much like item generator, except for the last mod. But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope this has enlightened you as to why GGG is probably not changing our harvest the way that we want, and has given you some insight into how they want crafting in this game to be. But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you find more Divines, Exalted Orbs, and Mage Bloods than me. And see you next time. Bye.